morning. Welcome back to class this week. I think we're going to have a nice weather week. I'm hoping we have a good weather today. Yesterday I mulched and my husband and I worked on ripping out some invasive plants out of our woods. So, hoping for another good day outside. Last time we read My Side of the Mountain, we stopped halfway through the chapter because it was very long. But to just review what we had been reading about, he talked a lot about the birds around him. It's winter. He uses the birds as a sign to know when he needs to head back to his tree if the storm is coming. He's talked a lot about Bear and Weasel, how he's been keeping them company. And just in general, how hard winter has been, but he's still been enjoying himself. So I will start back right here where we're talking about January. January was a fierce month. After the ice storms came more snow. The mountaintop was never free of it, and the gorge was blocked. Only on the warmest days could I hear, deep under the ice, the trickle of water seeping over the falls. I still had food, but it was getting low. All the fresh frozen venison was gone, and most of the bulbs and tubers. I longed for just a simple dandelion green. Toward the end of January, I began to feel tired, and my elbows and knees were a little stiff. This worried me. I figured it was due to some vitamin I wasn't getting, but I couldn't remember which vitamin it was, or even where I would find it if I could remember it. One morning my nose bled. It frightened me a bit, and I wondered if I shouldn't hike to the library and reread the material on vitamins. It didn't last long, however, so I figured it wasn't too serious. I decided I would live until the greens came to the land, for I was of the opinion that since I had had nothing green for months, that was probably the trouble. On that same day, Frightful caught a rabbit in the meadow. As I cleaned it, the liver suddenly looked so tempting that I could hardly wait to prepare it. For the next week, I craved liver and ate all I could get. The tiredness ended, the bones stopped aching, and I had no more nosebleeds. Hunger is a funny thing. It has a kind of intelligence all its own. I ate liver almost every day until the first plants emerged, and I never had any more trouble. I have looked up vitamins since. I am not surprised to find that liver is rich in vitamin C. So are citrus fruits and green vegetables, the foods I lacked. Wild plants like sorrel and dock are rich in this vitamin. Even if I had known this at that time, it would have done me no good, for they were but roots in the earth. As it turned out, liver was the only available source of vitamin C, and on liver I stuffed, without knowing why. So much for my health. I wonder now why I didn't have more trouble than I did. Except that my mother worked in a children's hospital during the war, helping to prepare food, and she was conscious of what made up a balanced meal. We heard a lot about it as kids, so I was not unaware that my winter diet was off balance. After that experience, I noticed things in the forest that I hadn't paid any attention to before. A squirrel had stripped the bark off a sapling at the foot of the meadow, leaving it gleaming white. I pondered when I saw it, wondering if he had lacked a vitamin or two and had sought them in the bark. I must admit, I tried a little of the bark myself, but decided that even if it was loaded with vitamins, I preferred liver. I also noticed that the birds would sit in the sun when it favored our mountain with its light, and I, being awfully vitamin-minded at the time, wondered if they were gathering vitamin D. To be on the safe side, in view of this, I sat in the sun too when it was out. So did Frightful. My notes piled up during these months, with my journal of birch bark, and my journal of birch bark became a storage problem. I finally took it out of my tree and cached it under a rock ledge nearby. The mice made nests in it, but it held up even when it got wet. There's one thing about using the products of the forest. They are usually waterproof. This is important when the weather is as near to you as your skin and as much a part of your life as eating. I was writing more about the animals now and less about myself, which proves I was feeling pretty safe. Here's an interesting entry. February 6th. The deer have pressed in all around me. They are always hungry. Apparently they stamp out yards in the valleys where they feed during the dawn and dusk, but many of them climb back to the hemlock grove to hide and sleep for the day. They manage the deep snows so effortlessly on those slender hooves. If I were to know that 1,000,000 years before today, my children's 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 children were to live as I am living in these mountains, I should marry me a wife with slender feet and begin immediately to breed a race with hooves. The Catskill children of the future might run through the snows and meadows and marshes as easily as a deer. I got to worrying about the deer, and for many days I climbed trees and cut down tender limbs for them. At first only 2 came, then 5, and soon I had a ring of large-eyed white-tailed deer waiting at my tree at twilight for me to come out and chop off limbs. I was astonished to see this herd grow, and wondered what signals they used to inform each other of my services. Did they smell fatter? Look more contented? Somehow they were able to tell their friends that there was a free lunch on my side of the mountain, and more arrived. One evening there were so many deer that I decided to chop limbs on the other side of the meadow. They were cutting up the snow and tearing up the ground around my tree with their pawing. 3 nights later they all disappeared. Not one deer came for limbs. I looked down the valley, and in the dim lights I could see the open earth on the land below. The deer could forage again. Spring was coming to the land. My heart beat faster. I think I was trembling. The valley also blurred. The only thing that can do that is tears. So I guess I was crying. So I'm sure we've all had a happy cry like that. That night the great horned owls boomed out across the land. My notes read, February 10th. I think the great horned owls have eggs. The mountain is white, the wind blows, the snow is hard packed, but spring is beginning in the hollow maple. I will climb it tomorrow. February 12th. Yes, 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 yes. It is spring in the maple. 2 great horned owl eggs lie in the cold snow-rimmed cavity in the broken top of the tree. They were warm to my touch. Eggs in the snow. Now isn't that wonderful? I didn't stay long, for it is bitter weather, and I wanted the female to return immediately. I climbed down, and as I ran off toward my tree, I saw her drift on those muffled wings of the owl through the limbs and branches as she went back to her work. I crawled through the tunnel of ice that leads to my tree now, the wind beating at my back. I spent the evening whittling and thinking about the owl high in the forest with the first new life of the spring. And so, with the disappearance of the deer, the hoot of the owl, the cold land began to create new life. Spring is terribly exciting when you are living right in it. I was hungry for green vegetables, and that night as I went off to sleep, I thought of the pokeweeds, the dandelions, the spring beauties that would soon be pressing up from the earth. Now I will just start the next chapter, but it's too long for us to read to. And the chapter is called The Spring and the Winter and the Beginning of My Story's End. So if you're curious, we have about this much to go. So we've finished most of the book. So I want you to think right now, if you were Sam Gribley, how would you want the story to end? Or if you were the author, how would you wrap this story up? Okay. The owl had broken the spell of winter. From that time on, things began to happen that you'd have to see to believe. Insects appeared while the snow was on the ground. Birds built nests. Raccoons mated. Foxes called to each other, seeking again their lifelong mates. At the end of February, the sap began to run in the maple trees. I tapped some trees and boiled the sap to syrup. It takes an awful lot of sap to make 1 cup of syrup. I discovered 32 cups to be exact. All this, and I was still in my winter fur-lined underwear. 1 or 2 birds returned. The ferns by the protected spring unrolled, very slowly, but they did. Then the activity gathered momentum, and before I was aware of the change, there were the skunk cabbages poking their funny blooms above the snow in the marsh. I picked some and cooked them, but they weren't any good. A skunk cabbage is a skunk cabbage. From my meadow, I could see the valleys turning green. My mountain was still snow-capped, so I walked into the valleys almost every day to scout them for edible plants. Frightful rode down with me on one shoulder. She knew even better than I that the season had changed, and she watched the sky like radar. No life traveled that sky world unnoticed by Frightful. I thought she wanted to be free and seek a mate, but I could not let her. I still depended upon her talents and company. Furthermore, she was different, and if I did let her go, she probably would have been killed by another female. For Frightful had no territory other than the hemlock patch, and her hunting instincts had been trained for man. She was a captive, not a wild bird, and that is almost another kind of bird. One day I was in the valley digging tubers and collecting the tiny new dandelion shoots when Frightful saw another duck hawk and flew off my shoulder like a bolt, pulling the leash from my hand as she went. "Frightful," I called, "you can't leave me now." I whistled, held out a piece of meat, and hoped she would not get her leash caught in a treetop. She hovered above my head, looking at the falcon and then at my hand, folding her wings, and dropped to my fist. "I saw that," a voice said. I spun around to see a young man about my own age, shivering at the edge of the woods. "You're the wild boy, aren't you?" I was so astonished to see a human being in all this cold-thawing silence that I just stood and looked at him. When I gathered my wits, I replied, "No, I'm just a citizen." "Ah, gee," he said with disappointment. Then he gave in to the cold and shivered until the twigs around him rattled. He stepped forward. "Well, anyway, I'm Matt Spell. I work after school on the Poughkeepsie New Yorker, a newspaper. I read all the stories about the wild boy who lives in the Catskills, and I thought that I found him and got a good story. I might get to be a reporter. Have you ever run across him? Is there such a boy?" "Oh, it's all nonsense," I said as I gathered some dry wood and piled it near the edge of the woods. I lit it swiftly, hoping he would not notice the flint and steel. He was so cold and so glad to see the flames that he said nothing. I rolled a log up to the fire for him and shoved it against a tree that was blocked from the raw biting wind by the stand of hawthorns. He crouched over the flames for a long time, then practically burnt the soles of his shoes, warming his feet. He was that miserable. "Why didn't you dress warmer for this kind of a trip?" I asked. "You'll die up here in this damp cold." "I think I am dying," he said, sitting so close to the fire he almost smothered it. He was nice looking, about 13 or 14, I would have said. He had a good bold face, blue eyes, hair about the color of my stream in the thaw. Although he was big, he looked like the kind of fellow he didn't know his own strength. I liked Matt. I've still got a sandwich," he said. "Want half?" "No thanks," I said. I brought my lunch. Frightful had been sitting on my shoulder through all this, but now the smoke was bothering her, and she hopped to a higher perch. I still had her on the leash. "There was a bird on your shoulder," Matt said. "He had nice eyes. Do you know him?" "I'm sort of an amateur falconer," I replied. "I come up here to train my bird. It's a she. Frightful is her name." "Does she catch anything?" "Now and then. How hungry are you?" I asked as his second bite finished the sandwich. "I'm starved, but don't share your lunch. I have some money. Just tell me which road takes you toward Delhi." I stood up and whistled for Frightful. She flew down. I undid her leash from her jesses. I stroked her head for a moment, then threw her into the air and walked out into the field, kicking the brush as I went. I had noticed a lot of rabbit tracks earlier and followed them over the muddy earth as best I could. I kicked up a rabbit, and with a twist, Frightful dropped out of the sky and took it. Roast rabbit is marvelous under any conditions, but when you're cold and hungry, it is superb. Matt enjoyed every bite. I worked on a small portion to be sociable, for I was not especially hungry. I dared not offer him the walnuts in my pocket, for too much had been written about the boy living off nuts. "My whole circulatory system thanks you," Matt said. He meant it, for his hands and feet were now warm, and the blue color had left his lips and was replaced by a good warm red. And that is where we will stop for today. So when we come back, we'll figure out more about Matt Spell, what he's doing on the mountain, and how Sam will handle it. So it does look like a beautiful day. I hope you get to play outside. And just so you're aware, we are going to start doing a little bit of science. It should be a fun activity. So today you just need to do the exploration, and tomorrow we'll do some hands-on activities. All right, I miss you all. Have a great Monday, and I will see you all on Wednesday.